Good afternoon, Tucker. And how are you today?
I am doing well, Paul. Looking forward to a great conversation.
Brilliant. So am I. And it's really great to catch up. We've been introduced through our LinkedIn contacts, and it's really great to sort of finally meet you. I had this vision. Not many people in the UK is called Tucker, and there's some famous people sort of when we was growing up of the Tucker in my world, which really made me smile when I had that image of this person I was going to meet today called Tucker. So it's really great to meet you finally.
Well, I hope I didn't disappoint.
No,
Sorry.
you haven't. It's been, I'll explain off air. It'd be better. I shouldn't have really started saying it. Anyway, so it's really great to see you. So tell us, whereabouts are you based?
So I live in the United States in Richmond, Virginia, just south of Washington.
Right. And what's the weather like there today?
We are having a lovely day. Started off this morning very cold, almost zero C or a little colder, and now it's going to get up to 60 degrees. So be a lovely, spring afternoon.
Brilliant. And is that typical for this time of year?
Our forecaster said that this year March would come in like a lamb and go out like a lion. And I think he was about right. We came into spring and we're going to go out much more with some super cold mornings.
Right. And have you
But
been
lovely.
noticed? And have you been noticing the differences where you are?
Flowers are starting to bloom. Yeah, I mean, I think yeah, but it's March is always so iffy. A little bit of snow, beautiful days, cut your
Hmm.
grass, and then shovel snow the next day. So pretty typical March for us, I guess.
Do you know, I walk every weekend, and I was just out walking. I was shocked that the daffodils just went boom. They were there.
Mhm.
I didn't even see
So
him coming
beautiful.
up this year, and it's this beautiful sight of the yellow, and it was a shock to me to think that because it hasn't felt like spring, and yesterday was our first day of spring, and already the temperature's starting to increase, which is nice. I really
Yeah,
enjoy
our
the
Lenten
springtime.
roses are blooming and dogwoods are in full bloom. And I
Yeah.
think I've cut my grass twice myself here.
Oh, really? Okay, so 'cause for the benefit of our audience today, it'd be really good to hear your background story and your origin story of how you come into the industry and what you're doing today.
So it's interesting as I sit here today, it's almost like almost all of my life's experiences kind of led to where I am now, which is always a pleasant way to say it. But I grew up kind of in a nice family in Richmond, Virginia, and my father was an engineer. I became an engineer after college. I was a consulting engineer just to understand what they do. I knew I didn't want to be one, but wanted to be one long enough so I could say I had been one. Was involved in some fascinating land use projects, and now that really helps me think about land use as we really think about the climate, the planet. um, I spent the next 10 years, I guess, of my career in natural gas, building pipelines, designing pipelines, uh, big exposure to liquefied natural gas. And it was really a nice part of my career as we were thinking about how to build this infrastructure and how natural gas works. I then went from there back to being a civil engineer for just a little while, building bridges and roads and pipelines and airports and shopping, just doing big civil engineering projects. And then I found my way back into the propane space where I really led ultimately up to chief operating officer of uh, a fairly large propane company. It was kind of nationwide, fourth largest in the country. We sold that business as a part of a bigger sale. I started my own business. So I always like to say that I understand, the complexities of big business, but I'm also really keen on the problems of small business because when I sold that business, we had, I guess, 1,600 employees, and my next business had one employee for a while. Grew that to be in 5 or 6 states, 7 states, and sold that business. And ultimately, uh, partnered with some of my natural gas friends to be in the manufacturing of uh, systems that you put on vehicles to make them run better on propane or natural gas. And then I've been in this job 10 years. And it's really kind of I hate to use the word capstone because I don't know, I hope it's not the end of my career, but all those things, land use planning, science, engineering, construction, kind of come together as we think now about how does natural gas or propane, how do they fit in to the narrative around a better place to live, a more affordable energy, a cleaner climate, and how does that all come together? So it's been an interesting run, and I would have to say I'm probably more challenged today than I ever have been.
Hmm.
But I also think it's a really rewarding place to be.
What is causing the challenges out of interest?
Well, I think just the whole climate narrative and the complexity of the truth, cutting through disinformation, thinking, the investments we're making today, uh, they're a decade out, right? We are different than most people you'll talk with because we're using our money um, to make investments in technology that we believe are needed into the future, but it's a 10-year investment arising at a minimum, and so we're having to think really clearly about, what will the world look like 10 years out, 20 years out, 30 years out, and how can we solve those problems with creative, environmentally friendly, healthy solutions in today's terms. It's a really fun challenge, but it'll definitely test you.
Yeah. For me, I don't see where the future is of natural. It's not on my radar. Obviously, my main role in my industry is I reduce energy. I reduce the amount of gas we use. I reduce the amount of electricity used. I'm not looking. I'm not from the renewable. I'm not a supply person regarding that side of it. So it's great to have you on this call, really, so we can get your perspectives about where this is going. For me, I'm nervous about gas going forward. I've seen our electricity carbon footprint come down considerably because it's been generated by gas, which is great. But then going forward, how do we hit the net zero mark with gas? Because there isn't a net zero gas, is there,
That's right.
currently at the moment? But I'm sure you can tell us where we are with it. Are we 10 years away from that, or are we nearer to that?
No, I think we're much further out than 10 years from that.
Right.
And it is interesting. I think the European position is clearly different than the North American position, which is entirely different than I think the Chinese position or, some others. So I watch Europe and spend a lot of time there very carefully because I think in many ways you are ahead of us. And in many ways, I want to learn from what you've done right, but also not mimic what hasn't gone so right.
Mhm.
Um, but I would say yes. I think I want to answer your question right now. There are many ways to decarbonize, or as I'm quick to say, just reduce carbon emissions without eliminating natural gas or propane. And I
Yeah.
think, one of the science you'll see we do a lot of science, but we study the U.S. grid very intently for what are the components that we use to make electricity, what's the carbon content of those, what's the ultimate carbon output of our grid today, state by state, balancing authority by balancing authority on a national level. And
Mhm.
it's scary how dirty that grid is today in the U.S.
Yeah.
because our grid still is heavily reliant on coal, oil, natural gas. 60% of our grid today is producing electricity from coal, oil, and natural gas, even more in the peak periods. So, as you think the future, and I don't, in Europe, you're starting to have that conversation around nuclear power. It really just hasn't been happening, right? We all decided it wasn't the right way to go, and I don't really have a dog in the fight either way, but clearly hydroelectric power, clean, low carbon, zero carbon, nuclear power, abundant, inexpensive, low carbon, no carbon. Um,
But a problem
you know,
afterwards, isn't there? With nuclear,
yeah,
it's great, but there's a problem afterwards.
that's
That's the
right.
issue, isn't it?
That's right.
Yeah.
Solar, wind, and at least our experience is, once you get much over 50% of your power generation from intermittent sources like solar and wind, unless you really have designed in robust energy storage in the form of batteries, which bring their own, baggage to the table,
Mhm.
um, you bad things start happening to the reliability and cost of your grid. So, yeah, my crystal ball is completely fuzzy after 2050. It's probably better 2030. And in that period from 2030, it gets increasingly fuzzy. But I see natural gas, at least in the US, being a dominant fuel into the almost into the 2050 period, because there's no alternate. There's really no reasonable alternative yet.
Yeah. Do you see stepping stones?
Oh, absolutely. Um, and the first stepping stone I see right now is how fast can we rid ourselves of diesel fuel, heating oil, bunker fuel if you're a ship, you know, it's going to tease us all, right? We've seen that now in geopolitical issues. The price of crude plummets. India, I'll take all you have. China, I'll take all you have at those distressed prices. So as we find oil continues to drop in price, I think it's going to become more problematic for us. But no, I'm very excited, one, about renewable fuels. I'm very excited about renewable propane. Just the distance we've come in the last 5 years in terms
Mhm.
of volume, price, and carbon content, and
Yeah.
pretty much the same for renewable natural gas.
Are you exploring hydrogen? Did you get involved in, does that come within your remit or
Well,
not?
I will tell you, frankly, we really spend a lot of time exploring all those choices because, we're looking to see, we never believe that there's going to be one energy, right? That this conversation around the path to a clean climate is through this beneficial electrification. I just don't buy into that. I'm quick to say that the wider path to a clean climate, in fact, the widest path to a clean climate is the one we want to be on. So certainly we watch hydrogen, and we are participating to a degree in seeing how well propane or natural gas can play with hydrogen. Um, I tend to be a little bit more pessimistic about the true short-term values of hydrogen, only because if we're talking about gray hydrogen, that which comes from, taking natural gas, there's no real environmental benefit in gray hydrogen. We're really trying to get to green hydrogen, but we have a long ways to go just to even think about how to have that much available renewable power where we have that much available water, right? People don't often talk about how much water is necessary to make green hydrogen. And I think water is a precious resource that we're going to talk a lot more
Mm,
about in the next couple of years. And
yeah.
then lastly, it just becomes the cost. Once we solve all those problems, we still have to deal with the relative safety needs for a high pressure, fully explosive gas like hydrogen. And as someone who's worked a lot in natural gas, that's a lower pressure, very explosive gas, and even propane, lower pressure yet. Um, and in terms of explosive range, really narrow compared to hydrogen. You see the perils with that. So I think we really we would like to believe in hydrogen as a fuel of the future because we're so optimistic about those products of combustion,
Mhm.
energy and water vapor. But I think there are many, many hurdles yet to overcome.
For me, as a in this industry, I don't get my head around hydrogen because, as you say, we need a significant amounts of water. We're going to need significant amounts of electricity to start generating it. So straight away for me, there's your negative. And then I understand that when it's in the pipe work or in any system leak, it's very fine, so it gets through all the gaps. So to contain it is quite difficult. So I don't really understand why all this investment, all this talk is around hydrogen rather than the existing systems we've got already. You know?
Exactly. And I think that's the other issue is that when we start talking about these and I think everyone loves to talk about these new forms of energy and kind of look over the current forms of energy, but you actually just talked about kind of an interesting aspect of hydrogen is I like to say it's slippery. It's looking for a way to escape,
Yeah.
and it makes Houdini look terrible, right? It can find ways to escape that no one ever dreamed of. So I think once we get beyond the complexities of truly making green hydrogen and we able to bear the expense of that, we still have to work through all those issues like leakage, safety, pressure. Um, I have a couple friends who study hydrogen closely, and they say there are 16 or 17 current issues with hydrogen, each one a potential deal killer, and really, if you're an optimistic person, you can remove half of those, but you still have half remaining. So, we really like to watch all these forms of uh, energy and think about where does electricity really go? Where does hydrogen really go? And how and I don't kid ourselves. Propane is a relatively small part of the energy mix,
Mm.
but it's an important part of the energy mix beyond the main transportation, material handling, logistics. It's so critical, and I think I stay frustrated because we could use these low carbon fuels today to reduce carbon emissions today, to cut cost today. We don't need new systems, new infrastructure. And even as a guy who really is deeply immersed in renewable fuels and renewable technology, one of the things we really like as we think about renewable propane is it fits right into today's infrastructure.
Hmm.
And you think about the electric grid, I mean, sure, you're close enough to it. The electric grid of the future looks nothing like the electric grid of today.
No.
And you're really talking about, I'm sad to say, but I think on a global scale, hundreds of trillions of dollars of investment to create this new grid. Um, and you just have to wonder, where will that investment come from? What will we not do to make that investment? Because
Hmm.
at least here in the U.S., we need to make more investment in infrastructure and more investment in schools and more investment in science and technology and policing and housing and medicine. And um, so there is a day of reckoning coming, but we offer a solution today as lower carbon, uh, environmentally friendly fuels today that use the existing infrastructure today.
When you talk about propane, I'm thinking about the bottles of propane. Are you talking about that going into the system, our existing systems?
Well, there's certainly a lot of study about because one of the unique things about propane people don't realize, propane contains no methane.
Right.
So as we really, want to talk badly about methane, and we should, because unburned methane is a pretty horrible greenhouse gas, propane doesn't have that problem. So fair amount of work goes into, could we use propane into the existing infrastructure network to have a better, more environmentally friendly fuel? I still think, Paul, that becomes more niche application. And while we're working with it, and we're doing some really great work in Canada, with the indigenous people using propane, I really still think that most of this work we're doing will be kind of beyond the natural gas mains, in vehicles, in material handling, in ships, where there's not some ready infrastructure network.
And so, do you think this would be more localized storage? So you'd have apartments or buildings or whatever you're saying with their own localized propane storage systems?
Very well could be, or even big regional systems, or
Hmm.
maybe we wind up, we're seeing today a migration to a lot more decentralized power. So that building may have its own, may be primarily electric, but those electric appliances are actually fueled by a propane generating station that's in that same community. We're
And
really, it's a fascinating that we're seeing a move towards a lot more decentralized power, um, microgrids that support islanded communities, microgrids that support islanded businesses, for example.
does propane have the same calorific, sorry, again, just put my teeth back in there, calorific value as natural gas? Is it
A bit
differences?
hotter, so a little bit more energy dense, and that doesn't really help us in most residential or commercial applications. It's a great benefit to us in engine applications. So in transportation and material handling, and to a degree, power generation
What?
is
Why?
also an engine
Explain.
application.
Can you explain that? Why it doesn't?
Why does it help us to have that energy density?
Yeah.
Because we can actually really use that energy density, that power, so it doesn't take as much propane to create that same amount of energy.
And how does that
So
not benefit in the residential world?
Well, it's because we still have to store that propane somewhere. So,
Right.
that we don't have that extensive pipeline network like natural gas has. You think about it, it's pretty amazing. Someone opens up their gas stove valve and
Just turns it on.
that completes a connection from the
Yeah.
gas fields all the way. It's not that way with propane. But propane's ability to easily be liquefied, to store in low pressure tanks really gives us tremendous advantages in vehicles, in ships, uh, in forklifts, a whole host of things.
And what's the
Uh,
carbon footprint for that for propane?
yeah, so the carbon footprint of propane today is about the same as natural gas. So I usually talk about my carbon intensity. It's kind of where I go, and so frankly, which is interesting, the carbon intensity of propane today is about half that of the electric grid in the U.S. today. So as we think about, the mantra is the only path to a clean climate would be through electrifying. It's pretty interesting to me that no, actually, the only path to a clean climate today is to use less electricity and more propane.
Mm.
And certainly those numbers will begin to converge, I think. But
But
people fail to
we
understand.
are going to use electricity, but from renewable sources. That is
We
why.
certainly are. Now,
Yeah.
the question in my mind is the real clean sources are nuclear and hydroelectric. The clean sources are also certainly solar and wind, but we're at least going to have tremendous battles over land use. Just
Hmm.
how many acres are we willing to commit to
Hmm.
solar fields? How
Yeah.
how many mountaintops are we willing to commit to
Mm.
wind farms? And you see that battle beginning to brew because where the land is plentiful is not always great for solar or wind. And wherever that is, you still have to build transmission lines. So there's a tremendous debate yet. And
Totally
and
understand
I,
that.
I
Yeah.
always listen to myself say this. It's not that we're not a champion of those causes because we really are we want to move to an affordable, reliable energy system. And we too rely on electricity to charge our cell phones and um, to do a whole lot in our life. But we really do see that we're probably going to need to have specialists, right? Specialists in heating your home when it's cold, specialists in heating your water so you can take a hot shower. Um, and I really do believe that propane, renewable propane later, natural gas, renewable natural gas later, will be a part of that equation.
Yeah. So um so propane could be used for CHP, maybe combined heat and power, or generating power turbines.
In fact, I appreciate you mentioned that. I just been working on that this morning, right before you and I started talking,
Brilliant.
just kind of having a state of the art review around combined heat and power or cooling and combined heat
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
power. And now micro cooling or heating combined heat and power. And propane is being used in that technology today. Um, in ways you probably never thought. Certainly, a lot of the islanded communities are using it, but
Yeah.
we're just reviewing some of the technologies. Capstone and Siemens, big providers of that technology today, and that's a great example of kind of how to get. Now we just crossed the border into these very modern, efficient technologies that showcase the features and benefits of fuel, and really it's not even comparable to thinking about using an electric solution for that, for reliability, for cost, for the climate.
Do you know what I feel that opens the door to, which is something I bang on about? Collaboration. You know, it shouldn't be I do solar, I do wind, I do natural gas, I do coal or oil. Everyone needs to be not fighting, not arguing about different things about the different arguments that we have regarding, you're talking about land space, etc. And we all these people, all these experts need to come together and collaborate, and the
Well, that's
CHP is a great opportunity for collaboration, isn't it?
see. So the heart of a CHP is an engine, and as a person who really is deeply in the engine world, it's shocking how modern engines are so much better than engines just 5 or 10 years ago. I'm always quick to say, finally, modern engineering married modern production, and we create these beautiful engines that are durable and efficient thermally efficient. And so you're right. And I think it's foolish for us to think about that there is one solution for everyone. There's not, in fact, even here in the United States, there could be a far different solution in climates that are cold versus climates that are hot, climates that are very wet versus climates that are dry. And CHP, though, is a great example of technology that we really didn't talk about 10 years ago. But I firmly believe in the next 5 years, we'll think about it even in our homes, not in our businesses, not in a hospital, not in our gymnasiums, but in our homes. And that's really one of our innovative areas, is trying to drive from CHP to micro CCHP, heating and cooling in one box, power generation in one box.
Just out of interest, I'm into CHP. I'll just let you into that one. Does it so I always work on a spark rate. Natural gas gives us 3 kilowatts of gas to 1 kilowatt of electricity. What does propane give us? The same?
It's about the same.
Yeah.
It's about the same. And again, I think no one ever thinks about that. Again, if we thought about ridding ourselves of the direct use of that energy, all of a sudden it could be that our demand, our need for energy is 3 times that amount, because producing electricity is inherently inefficient, right? Some of the most efficient generating facilities are 51, 52% efficient. A typical coal plant would be lucky to be 33% efficient. You lose another 6 or 7% in transmission. So all of a sudden, in order to have 1 watt of electricity at the light, you need to have 3 watts of electricity at the generating station. How novel that we could take CHP that all of a sudden becomes 90% efficient. And what we can do with that. And I'm not quite in tune with your European grid, but I can tell you our American grid, we're really in this uncomfortable position where demand is a little bit greater than supply right now. And then peak winter, peak summer, the grid operators are going, hey, consumers, you need to slow down a little bit, right? We're reaching the point of a grid instability. And so here we are now talking about putting more on the grid. And you and I haven't talked about it, but probably vehicles, certainly consumer vehicles, will go more and more towards electrification. I think that is an inevitable path here by regulation, if nothing else. And so being able to do something to take some of that demand off of our grid by using these specialists, as I quick to say, heat your home when it's cold, heat your water when you need it. That's a really valuable resource, even for those who want to champion a completely renewable future.
Yeah. It's a great headache tablet for the district network to take, isn't it? When they're seeing the demand on their infrastructure going down, with the localized CHP, they're gonna get a lot of benefits from that. That I only know that the one thing they don't like is when the CHP is going the other way onto the grid, unless it's controlled, because you can't rely on it, can you? It's a system that runs.
And that whole net metering, we find less and less emphasis on that. 5 years ago, it really was the go, no go reason to do it. But now I think most companies are doing it because actually, CHP provides a lower cost of energy to the facility, and 2, they need that reliability. I mean, I see it quite a bit. Nursing homes, convalescent homes, manufacturing that's on 24/7. They're like, I need to control my power, and I need. And by the way, I think they like to see the credit for their environmental savings.
And also financially, when you've got a rise in energy prices, we've had electricity prices have been going up significantly. It always grows quicker than the gas does. So by utilizing the gas to generate electricity, it's a win-win situation for an organization.
I think we have all been surprised at the rising cost of electricity. I'm intimately familiar with what you paid in Europe, and particularly in London, this winter. And clearly that's an anomaly, I believe, over a long term.
Yeah.
But the fact remains, the cost of electricity will have to rise because of the investment needed for the delivery system.
Yeah.
Um, like I said, we're hundreds of trillions of dollars of investment, and that investment has to be repaid at some rate of capital for sure.
What is the future of propane? Are we likely to see that go more greener? Is there some things we can do to that process to make it greener?
It's funny. I love the way your brain thinks. It's something that has been a kind of a pet project of mine for the last 2 or 3 years, because our producers of propane, you don't hear them talking about that a lot, right? And so I really now get to meet with them publicly and privately quite a bit. And first off, it is amazing to realize what they are currently doing to try to lower their own carbon footprint, partly to save money, partly because it's good for their business and it's good for those communities. So we've come a long ways just in the last 4 or 5 years in how we take natural gas and clean it up to make propane. We do that using renewable power. We do it using, a whole host of more efficient things. So yes, I'm happy with that. I don't think we ever can stop that. I think we have to continue. I mean, let's start with, safely fracking, right? I mean, that's always in the news. I think
Yeah.
we realize that
Yeah.
less methane escaping into the atmosphere. It's one of the essence of us for renewable propane. And we are now licensing those processes where we can go find this methane that's escaping into the air. Nobody else could do anything with it. We're able to capture it and turn it into renewable propane. Then we can more easily transport it, store it, use it at other locations. So there is this massive migration afoot to not only think about renewable streams that come from waste products and legitimate waste products, forest waste, farming waste,
Mm.
animal waste, and convert it to energy. And then the whole ecosystem is laser focused on reducing their own consumption, their own footprint as they make propane.
What's okay? You know, you're talking as if you started off the conversation by saying you're 10 years behind the curve as such. So what your challenge is to maybe speed that up a little bit, because we're running out of time, aren't we? Is there a way we can speed it up? Or is there challenges around why we can't make this happen quicker?
Well, I want to first clarify, because I am a firm believer that if we were really honest about reducing carbon emissions to now, reducing carbon emissions today, we should be using more propane today. Use less diesel fuel, and those opportunities everywhere I go, every place I go, it just is staggering to me how we continue to use diesel fuel in places where we could have used propane. We could have cut costs, cleaned the air, healthier the communities, reduced NOx and particulate matter. So what I specifically said was, as we think about new technologies, but I wanted to correct you with one thing, because we're quick to say that we can reduce carbon emissions today by using low carbon fuels like propane and natural gas. But you are correct. We have to think about, well, where are we going to be in a decade? How do we get to a cleaner climate? Will the electric grid of renewables and all this world we hope for of wind farms and solar panels, will it be ready? What will the demand picture look like in a decade from now? And frankly, we never get equilibrium in that situation. We
Mm.
never see where the grid is truly renewable. And we see that there has to be some other source. And we continue to see that one of those fuels that should be prominent is propane today, renewable propane tomorrow. So can we get there? I think the answer is we have to get there, because we really don't have another choice. Now, lastly, you and I have been talking this whole time about the climate and greenhouse gases. I'm quick to think as well, and I'm glad to see the science is starting to talk about that. I tend to never want to have the conversation around climate without matching it to health, and then lastly, matching it to affordability, which here we talk a lot about equity and justice, kind of a good proxy. So for me, I stay in a trifecta. How can we benefit the climate? I'm equally concerned, if not more concerned, in the shortest term about how do we improve human health? How do we reduce those NOx emissions from diesel fuel? How do we eliminate particulate matter? Because we have to have a healthier population, and that's about health and not climate. And then lastly, how do we afford those solutions, right? Again, I'm always frustrated by the Tesla driver that says, look at me, I'm good for the climate because I drive a zero emission car. Well, actually, it's not a zero emission car. I breathe the full equation of your car every day. And in many respects, what you've done is most disingenuous to those who live near the power plant. You've pushed your emissions upstream to the power plant.
Exactly.
And while you can feel good about your choice, what you've done is sent your problem arguably to the people who can least avoid your problem. They're least able to move. And that to me is real environmental justice. So yeah, I am. You have to be an optimist if you're a futurist to a degree and you think about this, because there's no choice for failure, right? The opportunity for failure isn't in front of us. We have to be successful.
I like the way you
Um,
said about that. Move, because they're moving that problem nearer to the power station regarding the Tesla. It is.
right. Yeah.
The
So many people. I mean, again, and we struggle with that, and I understand how complex this is. So people who don't think about it for hours and hours each day, it's not in their mind, but we see it all the time. We're going to drive an electric vehicle because an electric vehicle is clean. Well, it's only as clean as the electricity that is generated. It's only as efficient as the electricity that's generated. And to insinuate that you're doing it for the good of the people is quite fallacious sometimes,
Mm,
because the people who are most harmed are often the people who are least able to make any of those changes.
exactly. Very good point.
Yeah.
Eh, Tucker, you're surprising me with your your language, if that makes sense, and the way you're talking about climate change from where you're based in your industry. For me, you're a gas expert. Yeah, I've never. This is the first time we've had someone from the gas industry, so thank you very much for joining us on today and putting your head above the wall for us. And I'm surprised about the conversation that we're having. Tell me, what is that? So we had two sides of the fence, yeah, renewable, green energy management, and then the gas side, the gas producer. What's the language like that side, the culture? Is it the same? Are you different? Are you leading it, or what's happening there?
Well, I'm going to take your compliment that we are certainly
That
a
was a
part.
compliment.
We're certainly trying to be leading this conversation around, because you could, and by the way, propane cannot, but natural gas could, diesel
Hmm.
fuel could say, you know what, we are so dominant in our market positions that I appreciate all of the things you're trying to do. We'll just sit here and be dominant until you change our market. That is not at all. Propane has always been willing and needing to work with other fuels, right? We're not the dominant fuel. So we spend all of our days trying to figure out how to work with electricity. How do we build truly net zero homes that what would be truly net zero could get by with, as you correctly said earlier, a 2 kilowatt generator, a few solar panels up on the roof. And so I am highly complimented by your statement that we're talking differently. And I think it comes from the fact that we're clearly realize that we are a part of the solution. We're not the solution. In fact, we're quick to say we don't believe that there is a solution.
There isn't a solution. No.
And we see that every day with the customers that we work with, thinking about how to get them to a better spot.
Brilliant. I like that. So, Tucker, it's come to that time during our interview. It's gone really quick. I can't believe how quick this gone. It's come to that time where I'd like to put you on the spot, and you've been on the spot all the way through this, and I really appreciate some of your answers today. But is there something you can give back to our industry today as a takeaway for them to think about?
Well, I think the one thing I love to say is I just love people who are involved in this to think about how to speak out and to create that dialogue that creates truth and really a good, meaningful exchange of ideas. This isn't simple. I mean, it's not it's not done in 3-second sound bites by politicians or newspaper people or TV anchors. This is a long-term battle with complex solutions and complex ideas. And it starts when local leaders, and that could be, someone in 6th grade who's asking the right question, and it could be an industry leader, but when they just allow the dialogue to happen and allow discourse to happen, because I think that's where we get to a better solution.
Yeah.
So I love it when people just really begin to study a little deeper and challenge the status quo.
That's brilliant. I like that. We need to challenge it. Otherwise, if we don't challenge it, just sit back. Who's going to challenge it? Where are we going to be in, as we said, 10 years' time, behind the
right.
curve even further?
And Paul, you're doing something that no one ever talks about, which I always applaud people who do it, is actually thinking about conservation. How can we stop wasting? How can we be more efficient in everything we do? How can we not waste water? How can we not waste energy? How can we not waste land? I mean, it's a real issue, and every one of those things that we save water, we save energy, we save the land, it's a real meaningful impact on this story.
Brilliant. Well, I take that as a compliment as well, as we're sharing compliments today. And thank you for Tucker. Thank you for joining us. It's been a real pleasure. It's really great to hear the story from the gas point of view. We will love to hear you in the future. Come back and talk to us in 6 months' time, maybe, and tell us what's happening. We do a revisited further down the line, so it'd be really great to hear what's happening in your world. So please keep in touch with that, and in the meantime, please, you and your family stay safe in these times.
I look forward to staying connected with you. Thank you.
Thank you.